Hello everybody. So has the DAT crash gone too far? The digital asset treasury companies, many of which I cover on this channel, especially strategy, they're crashing really hard right now. And, there's not a lot of reasons for this happening. We are going through a valley of despair. A lot of these assets are heavily discounted right now. And so as these assets are dumping, I ask a simple question. Is the future of money cancelled, right? Is fiat going to remain virtuous from now on? Is the future of money cancelled? Is gold going to be the next hard asset? Are we ignoring the fact, for example, that if technology and humanoid robots are ever a thing, mining gold will be much easier, which will drop the price of gold. Bitcoin is finite. You can't create more Bitcoin. Read the basic book, the Bitcoin Standard, Saifedean's book. The basic belief in Bitcoin is that the biggest threat of Bitcoin is fiat getting its act together. That's the biggest threat to Bitcoin. And as far as I'm concerned, fiat is getting worse and worse by the day. That's why I ask, is the future of money cancelled? I don't think so. So why are we crashing so hard? Why are we crashing so hard? And of course, I make a distinction between the future of money and the future of web applications and the future of any applications that doesn't need humans in the loop, like insurance companies or banks or any traditional institution, or websites, like social media or whatever. All of these technically don't need any humans in the loop. They will likely be built, and they are beginning to be built, and we see stable coin, which is the first mainstream application of a true Web3 infrastructure. These will be built on these large computer systems that we call blockchains that are Ethereum, Solana. These are the two big ones. There's a few other ones like Sui, for example. But down the road that will be Web3, and down the road, in my view, they are a black hole of their own too, which is these public blockchains. Eventually, they will be running insurance companies. They will be replacing Swift. They will be replacing Visa. They will be replacing NASDAQ, all fully automated 24/7. That's the next evolution of the internet. ETH and Solana are the next evolution of the internet. I listened to the Saylor interview that he did yesterday. He's agreeing to this too. He's talking about this too. This is the next stage. This is not money as we mean it, because it's not finite, but it's still the fuel, it's still the asset that's going to need to be spent to run these public blockchains. And so that's why I ask, is Web3 cancelled? I don't think Web3 is cancelled. And so if you're an owner of these equities, in my view, over a very long run, we're going to have a really good time. At least that's my view. So let's get started. Let's look at strategy. Of course, I cover strategy on this channel way too much. Strategy is now mNAV compression. We just keep compressing. It's the lowest we've ever seen it. Basic mNAV is 1.13. So I kind of ask, why would anybody buy anything else if they're interested in that sector at a 1.13? We have a lot of them trading at a below 1, like NACA, for example, is one. But there's a few other ones that are trading below 1. 1.13, what is going on? What are we doing? Have we forgotten that this was the best performing stock of the past 5 years, along with Nvidia? It's like the market has forgotten about that. Of course, we are dumping more than Bitcoin. That's normal, by the way, but we shouldn't be dumping quite this much, right? We should be dumping like 1.5 times the Bitcoin performance. We're dumping way more than we should. And so we're dumping way more than we should, which is, if you look at the mNAV over the past 30 days, we are at the lowest ever. This is strategy tracker tracking this. And I want to talk briefly about some analysts focusing on technicals. I don't do that because my long-term horizon is so far away. It's beyond the 2030s that I don't need to time if I want to buy some options or whatever. This is not what I do. But traders, it's worth noting that some traders are getting interested in MSTR. I've seen a few talking about MSTR. This is one of the bigger traders on X talking about how he's targeting 500 to 520 within the 3 to 6 months using technical analysis. Something I don't do on this channel. I don't pretend to be able to judge the quality of technical analysis, but I'm seeing traders now who are like, okay, I gotta get on this train. It is now too cheap. And Peter DiCarlo is not the only one. There's a few other ones on X that you can see. Not a trader, but I did want to mention her, Lynn Alden. Lynn Alden, who has been praising Metaplanet. Metaplanet trading below 1 mNAV. It actually bounced back up a little bit, trading at 1.07 mNAV right now, basic mNAV. So if you look at Metaplanet, ask yourself, trading at 1.07 mNAV, you know, I liked Metaplanet myself, but Metaplanet has dumped way more than MSTR, and, you know, well over 90% of my portfolio has always been MSTR. So I haven't really felt the pain. But, you know, when you look at Metaplanet at 1.07, you got to look at strategy and ask yourself, it's 1.13, right? So the blue chip in the sector is barely more expensive than Metaplanet. No, there should be a greater delta between these two companies. Metaplanet knows this, by the way. They know they are way too cheap. This is why they are doing a buyback and buying back their shares. And of course, these stocks, I don't have the data on here, but these stocks are 30-ish% short float, right? The float is heavily shorted on all these companies. By buying back the stock, they could trigger some sort of a squeeze. And we are seeing some nice bounces in a few names in the sector, like Semler, for example, had a nice bounce. You had ASST, what a nice bounce. So here and there, we're seeing some pops. You know, I'm hoping tomorrow we get a good Fed speech. Thursday, we get a good China deal, and then we see a pop in the sector, because today is just a risk-off day. It's like everybody's selling everything to buy NVIDIA. Is essentially how the day ended. I didn't think the day was going to go like this. I thought NVIDIA would lift on all boats. No, today NVIDIA lifted itself. NVIDIA breaks 200. It's as though people were selling all of these assets to go ahead and buy NVIDIA. I mean, that's kind of silly what I'm saying, but it's a little bit how it feels. Anyways, they are buying back their stock. They are right to do that, not at 1.07, but if you know, you want to have that in place before the stock trades too cheap. And so if it were to trade at like a 0.8, that's when you would want to do it and potentially buy back these stocks. And I'm going to enter other stocks and talk about other stocks who should definitely be doing buybacks right now. So one of these stocks is SBET. SBET is trading at an mNAV of 0.83. And SBET, note, they're going to have very little forward dilution. So they borrowed very little money. As you know on this channel, between dilution, mNAV diluted, and basic mNAV, I typically prefer basic mNAV because the dilution is typically down the road in the future at a very favorable price. So that's why I like to use basic mNAV instead of diluted mNAV. But in the case of SBET, it's essentially the same for them. Basic or diluted is essentially the same. They borrowed very little money. To me, this is as raw of an arbitrage opportunity as it gets, right? You get, 15% upside just by buying Sharplink versus buying SBET, assuming it trades back at a 1. And so, of course, like, I don't know who's going to win the war of the Web3 blockchain. The Web3 blockchain war, I don't know who's going to win it. But, you know, ETH and Sol are probably solid bets. A lot of people are talking about SUI, but the options in the public markets for SUI are not very high. The bet is probably going to lie somewhere between ETH and Sol. You know, I tend to prefer Sol, but it's a debate. It's true that ETH is more established and ETH is more well-liked by the financial establishment. But anyways, it really doesn't matter because these two assets are highly correlated to Bitcoin. But unlike Bitcoin, because they are proof of stake network and not proof of work network. In proof of stake network, it is staking yields that are earned and not mining rewards. And so if you want to earn a yield as a Bitcoin miner, you need to do some proof of work algo. ETH and Sol power a proof of stake algorithm, which means that they pay a yield built in. These companies earn a built-in yield. Now, when it comes to Sharplink, the yield is 3%, and they do liquid staking and all sorts of modern staking methods. The yield is 3%, and they hope with active management to potentially increase that, potentially increasing it to 4%. So they earn a yield. So you would be getting 15% more exposure via an asset like Sharplink, SBET, versus just buying the ETF or buying the ETH outright, and then they earn a higher staking yield on your behalf. And so, to me, this is quite interesting. To me, this is obviously much more interesting than a bond, although it has characteristics that kind of feel like a bond. But it's much more interesting to have the yield, and you're betting on the future of finance and the future of web applications and apps. Any digital app, likely many of them are going to move to the blockchain. That's the bet that you're making looking at these companies. And many of my viewers have asked me about BitMine, BMNR. Well, all I have to say about BitMine is that there is clearly a Tom Lee premium. Tom Lee is kind of a Cathie Wood of the 2025s, right? It's kind of a Cathie Wood of 2025. There's a premium to what Tom Lee says and what Tom Lee does. He's every day on CNBC, every morning on CNBC. Very popular on all sorts of socials, etc. And so we're seeing a Tom Lee premium. We're not seeing a Joe Lubin premium, even though Joe Lubin was one of the co-founders of Ethereum. So BMNR has a premium. Joe Lubin doesn't have a premium. And on this channel, I have kind of a value stance. So I'm generally going to prefer the more value-oriented stock. And when I look at BMNR halved roughly from the peak. When I look at Sharplink, Sharplink was divided by 5 from the peak. So that's point number one. Point number two, when I look at mNAV, I have a 1.36. So I'm paying by 36%. I'm overpaying my ETH by 36% if I buy BitMine, BMNR. And I'm underpaying my ETH if I buy SBET at a 0.83. You're underpaying with SBET, you're overpaying with BMNR. And BMNR, when you actually look at the presentation, so of course they've been accumulating more Bitcoin. They have an ATM in place. They've done the ATM not too long ago, but they haven't done it in weeks for now. So they haven't really done it. They still have 300 million of cash, which is why they were able to buy 2 days ago. They were able to buy some ETH because they still have some cash. But more importantly, I'll stop a second on the presentation of Tom Lee. And nowhere in this presentation do I see him, and I didn't watch the presentation, I just watched the slides. He might have talked about it in the keynote itself, but I don't really see him discuss the staking yield and what kind of yield farming are you going to do? How are you going to get out on these dApps and earn a yield beyond the basic native staking yield of Ethereum? I don't see that technical conversation on how they're going to earn the yield. Now, on the other hand, when you go on SBET's presentation, there's a whole explanation onto the staking and how they're going to earn the staking yield. So, and this is mostly a macro presentation and how BitMine's goal is to accumulate more of the macro. So in a way, I think SBET is a more technical company than BMNR, who is more about acquiring as much ETH as possible, and then let's see what we can do about that. So BMNR in that way is much closer to a MSTR than say a SBET, which is just a bet on Ethereum. This is closer to a MSTR. They also own a token amount of Bitcoin, very little Bitcoin they own, but they own a little bit of that. So I prefer SBET because I'm a long-term investor and I'm not looking for short-term returns. I'm looking for the long run. And I prefer this one if I were to choose either of these two. But my long-time viewers know that I prefer Solana over Ethereum, mostly because when I was kind of into the weeds of that field, I remember the fees of Ethereum being $100, the gas fees, and Solana was fractions of a penny, right? And it's still the case today. Okay, yeah, it's much cheaper today to use ETH, but I think ETH suffered so much from these high gas fees and the stigma in the prior cycle that a lot of developers have moved on to Solana, and Solana is it's nearly free to transact on Solana, and they have so many transactions on Solana. Anyways, this is not a comparison of the blockchain. I assume a lot of people just want to spread their bets because, like I said, we don't know which will be the leading smart contracts blockchain in the future. We have no idea which one that's going to be. So maybe spreading the bets is a good idea. So as you know, I had loaded on DFDV. So DFDV was giving warrants, free warrants, 10 for 1. So you would get 1 warrant for 10 shares of DFDV you owned. They just issued those warrants, right? I don't see a price on them yet. They're not quoted them yet, but they just appeared magically in my broker. So I'm very happy about the 2028 1750 warrants. That was a beautiful gift from DFDV. Hopefully Upexi and a lot of these treasury companies do the same. It's a way for them to to set themselves up to earn funds in the future at a pre-locked or a pre-agreed upon price. It's a great sweetener, and I love that they give these warrants. But now I'm back to Upexi, because Upexi is so much cheaper. Again, the value stance, Upexi is so much cheaper than DFDV, and I have to assume that, I mean, of course, in general, the staking yields on Solana are higher than Ethereum, so you make more of a yield. But you know, let's say if DFDV is more advanced at yield farming, and for example, Upexi doesn't do any of that. Maybe Upexi does a 7% yield, and maybe DFDV does a 10% yield. Only time will tell. But you know, it's not rocket science. With AI, I'm sure Upexi can earn and target that 8 to 10% yield on the bag. And in both cases, you're getting the Solana bag for cheaper. For DFDV, you're getting the Solana bag for 0.95. So you get it 5% off if you want to get exposure to Solana via DFDV. But look at Upexi. This has gotten ridiculous. Again, with the idea that fully diluted mNAV is not the better way to look at this, because the dilution is going to be accretive and down the road. So just looking at the native mNAV, the basic mNAV, which is what I look at. So they have 272 million market cap. That's a market cap. Net asset value 393. So you can calculate the basic mNAV on your own. You're looking at a 0.69 mNAV on Upexi. It is the cheapest treasury company of any digital asset. Of all of the digital assets I've seen, it's the cheapest. If you know a cheaper one, let me know. I want to analyze it. But to me, this one is the cheapest. And it reminds me of the good old GBTC days. I remember back in the day I had gotten in GBTC. GBTC was trading at a similar discount for maybe 6 months. You may remember that. And when GBTC got turned into an ETF, it traded back into a 1. So this reminds me of the old GBTC days. But in addition to that, it has an 8 to 10% yield on top of that. So for the long-term holder, I just love it very much for a long-term holder. Now, if you're trying to bet and figure out what's going to happen over the next 60 days because you got options in December or something, you know, I can't help you. But if you're a long-term holder, if you want to own these assets that own the infrastructure of the future, the Web3 infrastructure, that own a big stake in a TradFi wrapper, owning it into the 2030s, that's what I'm looking to doing, and that's why I love these stocks very much right now. So anyways, this was not investment advice, not financial advice. This is only entertainment on this channel. I hope you were entertained. No financial advice. Please like, please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.